Hey, what's going on? I've been getting a few questions about how to shove a 6L80E into a third gen Firebird or Camaro, I guess. They're exactly the same. So I figured I'd take a little bit of time and answer some of your questions. All right, so one of the things that I did that is not necessary, but I did an axle swap. This is a 2002 or 2006 Ford Crown Victoria Police Interceptor axle. I was told it's posi, but if you look in there, clearly it's not. Which is kind of a bummer because that was the main reason I bought this axle, but shame on me for not even checking. But I did have to shave off all the brackets, the stock brackets, and build all my own brackets for the suspension. And kind of hard to see those spring perches, but there they are. And that is a hand-built panhard bar also. And the exhaust is definitely an issue that's really hard to tackle on these cars. There just really isn't a whole lot of clearance on them, and you find yourself always trying to find ways to squeeze in more exhaust, and there just isn't a whole lot of room. But there's a MagnaFlow. I love MagnaFlow. Love the way they sound. I always have. But coming back down here, anyways, there will be a coupler right here, just like a strap band exhaust clamp. I love those. They're amazing. I love the way they work. So one of the biggest things to do a 6L80E swap is the transmission, obviously. The amount of room that it takes is pretty freaking monstrous. It hangs down really low. It's roughly 1.5 inches or 2 inches lower than a stock transmission, a 4L80, 700R4, 4L60E, etc., etc. So the 6L80E, I mean, you've got the benefit of those 2 extra gears, but you also are slightly disadvantaged with this this oil pan. But if you look at the engine oil pan, you'll see that they're almost the same height. It's just the angle the transmission hangs at. When you're installing these 6L80Es, if you look up there, you'll see that there's virtually no clearance. Put the light on so I can see a little bit better. But there really isn't any clearance. I didn't want to get into cutting my tunnel because I just really don't want that much fab work. So this is what I made. As I had subframe connectors that I installed years ago already, so I just kind of made myself my own cross member that goes all the way across, from subframe connector to subframe connector. So subframe connectors I already had welded in. My cross member goes subframe connector to subframe connector, and I started making provisions for a bolt to go through right here. It's already braced in, and it will also be braced in right here as well. And I want the shortest distance of tubing that I can, because the shorter tube that you have going anywhere, the stronger that tube is going to be. Even though this is DOM tubing and it's extremely strong, it's at least easily 3 times stronger than anything factory that you could ever get. But it's better to go shorter. I mean, you could use the factory bolt hole locations, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just a little bit more fab work to go from here to here than it is to go from right here to here. So that'll eventually be tied in. I'll weld in a plate, make that really strong. Next, one of the issues is these connectors that the 6L80s come with, and they're really good. They're amazing connectors, They are watertight connectors, so I mean you can really put them through a lot of abuse. This transmission is made for a truck after all, so but the issue that you run in, the cables themselves, they're not much bigger than your finger, but the end connectors, like on the other side of this, they're huge, so you end up having to drill a fairly large hole into your car, and I'm never excited about drilling a hole in my car, even though every time I do, I come out to my wife and I'm like, look, check out this hole I just drilled, and she's like, oh, that's awesome, and she doesn't care anyways, but wow. She's here in the garage, she heard me. Anyways, so that's one of the things that I definitely didn't want to do with my car, but worst case scenario, I can just cut out with a circular hole or circular saw, and I could weld that in later if I really had to. So I mean, it sucks, but it's not the worst thing ever. Next, with the 6L80E, the output shaft is the same output shaft that is in a Turbo 350 or Turbo 400. So you can use the yoke from Turbo 350 or Turbo 400, and it'll slip right on there. It's magical. I love it. It's amazing. But the rest of the drive shaft, you have to measure for. And from the center to center, if this only applies to the 8.8 rear end, by the way. So from center to center, it is 44 inches. So you can go down and get yourself, this is a chromoly drive shaft. The drive shaft is chromoly. These joints, they're cast joints, so they're not the strongest joints, but they told me it'll still hold 500 horsepower. And I was like, ha ha ha, I'm pushing it over 7. So we'll see how long these will last. I'm sure there'll be catastrophic failures, and I'll end up having to do a lot more welding. But the chromoly drive shaft, they said, will hold whatever horsepower I put to it. It's just these joints. These are 1310 joints, and if I wanted a stronger joint, I would have to upgrade to a 1350 joint. So basically, I would have to eliminate all of this drive shaft and start over with a whole new drive shaft. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to try this one out because I already have it made. It's already balanced and everything, and it fits in there amazingly. I don't have it quite bolted in yet, but 44 inches center to center is the perfect length if you're using a Ford 8.8. I don't know about the stock transmission or the stock axle because I got rid of that really quick. So I've got Heim joints here because I wanted to have something in here that's really strong that can articulate a lot but won't flex. The stock torque arm, they just have so much flex in them. They're garbage. The only thing those stock torque arms are really good for is keeping your axle straight up and down, which, I mean, it's really the only job that it needs to have or needs to do. But I mean, I really actually plan on putting a lot of horsepower to this. So there's the other side of the torque arm. Heim joints everywhere because even though it's not gonna articulate at all right here whatsoever, and it probably won't even articulate at all right here either, but any movement that it does have, I mean, that Heim joint will allow it to move, and this Heim joint up here will definitely allow it to articulate much more and be stronger than anything stock that you could ever have. So even if you have polyurethane bushings, it's not going to, the polyurethane bushings, they're going to stiffen it up a lot, but they're not going to want to let it flex. And they're definitely not going to give it the same range of motion as a Heim joint. So Heim joints it is. My wife just called me gay. So so here's some more video of the exhaust. It hasn't been hung yet, so it still moves quite a bit because it's not in its final resting place. but this is generally where the exhaust is going to go. And if you do it right, you even actually have enough room to put another exhaust tube right here. So you could technically run true dual 3-inch exhaust all the way down this car. There's room for it, but I mean, once you get up here, it's a little bit trickier. On the passenger side of the car, where the catalytic converter went, there's actually a cutout in the floor pans specifically designed for, there's a better angle, specifically designed for the catalytic converter. So it makes it easier on the passenger side to run your exhaust from there. And if you were to come from the driver's side, you see, even on your stock cars, without this cross member, this huge cross member in the way, even then, it's really hard to route any exhaust right here because it's already so low. You really just don't want to mess with it. It's better to not run any exhaust right here, but you can. It's just going to hang low, and it's going to scrape on every single speed bump you've ever seen in your life. But if you do it right, you can come right between here, where my hand is, and you can route some exhaust. I mean, it'll still hang down a little bit low, but you probably won't scrape it on every single thing. NASCAR, what they do is they use like a rectangular tubing almost. It's kind of like regular exhaust, except they squish it flat on two sides of it, so you have a lot more clearance. And you could do something like that right here. You can do it really anywhere on a car. And it's not really, chances are none of you guys, or not very many of you guys, are going to be making 1,000 horsepower. So having dual 3-inch exhaust is just, it's way overkill. It's just really not necessary. It's great for 500 horsepower, just a single 3-inch exhaust. It'll support 500 horsepower, which is most people's goal anyways, or under. But I mean, if you're planning on going over 700 horsepower like I am, I mean, a 2 3-inch exhausts is probably a better route to go. It's just, you don't really want to cause any back pressure on your turbo, because then your turbo will start to surge. You'll lose life in your turbo, and you really won't get the power that your engine has potential for. So up next is the shifter linkage. The shifter linkage is a huge pain in the butt because, I mean, I got a kit from, I think it's called Transmission Control Solutions, and what they do, they sell you this kit. It comes with this little arm that hangs down right here. It comes with the shifter cable. It comes with the brackets to put everything together. And this cable, you see there, I've got it ran through my big ass hole up there. The cable is actually really hard to mount inside the cab. I found out that I had to fabricate and weld my own bracket on the inside for the shifter so that the shifter would function normally. But the way the cable is and the way it's designed, I would have liked to see them build a cable for these cars specifically that wraps around the front of the vehicle, rather than having to wrap around the back, because it causes a little bit of a binding issue. It's nothing that you can't overcome. It's just, it's not the cleanest way to do it. It's definitely not convenient, and you definitely have to fabricate minor things to accommodate any of this stuff. But this one thing I forgot to mention is this transmission bracket. That's actually a 700 R4 bracket, and it works exactly the same. 700 R4 4L60E. It works exactly the same. This is a polyurethane bushing, which I should technically have it solid mounted, but I did want a little bit of vibration dampening seeing that everything else in the car is solid. There are no other bushings in this car except for right here, for the drivetrain anyways. Yeah, that 700 R4 bracket, it works great. I would suggest using this, especially if you're under 500 horsepower. If you're going over 500 horsepower, you're definitely going to have to go with a solid mount, because you'll rip this right in half. And I know that I'll definitely have to go with a solid mount. I'll get in there and I'll fabricate one. I'll build one up. But to start, when I start driving the car initially, I'm going to be doing a lot of testing and tuning. And I don't really want to put a whole lot of power to the car right away anyways. So that mount will be fine to test and tune. It'll take out some of the vibrations, but not much. All right, moving up to the dipstick. So the dipstick was a huge pain in the butt. The stock dipstick does not fit on a 3rd gen. Definitely not. What I had to do is I had to bend the ever-living crap out of it to get it to fit in here. And then, as you can see right here, I put a nice little kink in it and some of the bends, but luckily that kink isn't enough to stop the cable or the dipstick from sliding down in there. It's a little bit tight, but it's nothing to worry about too much. But then you have to bend it again right there, coming up into the engine bay. And this is one of those areas that I would definitely say a Transdapt 6L80E braided dipstick tube would be the most beneficial. You don't want a super long one unless you really like it coming all the way out into your engine bay. And but if you got anything that's under 3 feet, I mean, you would definitely be fine. But these dipstick tubes, they're definitely made for a truck, and they definitely do not fit without heavy modifications. I did have to cut off over 1.5 feet of the tube to get it to fit inside the engine bay, and I'll go up there and I'll show you what that's all about here in a little bit. But moving on from that, the bell housing, I've got a 5.3. It's a semi-built 5.3. It's oily down here. I've had a transmission leak for a while from one of these tubes, but the bell housing is great because a Chevy 5.3 and the 6L80E bell housing, they mate right up. The stock starter fits with whatever engine, so you don't really have to worry about that. The only thing that you really have to worry about on the 6L80E is you have to make sure that you get the torque converter for the 6L80 and the flex plate. If you don't have those two things, you're definitely not going to mate your LS engine to your transmission, because these flex plates are specific. They are specific to the transmission. The LS engine will bolt to any LS flex plate, and it will even bolt to small block Chevy flex plates. Well, let me take that back. There are small block Chevy flex plates that are made to bolt to a 700 R4 or 4L60E, pre-computerized. So I shouldn't say 4L60E, 4L60, no E. So any 700 R4, Turbo 400, Turbo 350, your LS engine is going to fit. You just got to get the right flex plate. A lot of the flex plates are specific to the transmission, so you definitely have to make sure you don't mess up there. All right, so transmission cooler. You will definitely have to get one of these plates. I found it on Amazon. It's something like a 6L80E trans cooler adapter plate. I think they're either 15 or 30 bucks. I can't remember exactly what it is. But here, I don't like braided hoses. I hate braided hoses because no matter what, no matter how tight you get them, they always leak. So I got 6AN fittings to hardline. This is 3/8 hardline, and I bent it. They're not the greatest bends in the world because I definitely do not have a professional bender. But 6L80E to hard tube, and I only have it looped like this, going back to itself, just so that I can start it and test it and make sure everything works. And when the time comes to drive it, I'll definitely have the transcooler hooked up, but I just don't have enough of the line right now to finish that. So, but that definitely will be an issue that I will be solving here in the near future. Now on to the beans and the fruit of the whole entire build. This is my favorite part of the entire car. It's the business end. It definitely is crazy. It's out there. It's wild. The wife says it sucks. She wants it to illegal. She wants it to pass emissions, and I don't know what emissions are, honestly. So, without further ado. All right. Now, I know there is a lot going on here. Let me step back so you can take it all in. So, I really haven't seen any car with the intercooler. This is a water air to intercooler. I haven't seen any cars with water to air intercooler up here quite like this in this configuration. The reason I did it like this was because it just looked bold and crazy. I was looking for a place to put my intercooler, and I coming over here, and I was like, oh shit, there's no room over here, because the turbo exhaust it gets in the way. So there's just not really a good place to mount my intercooler. And so I set it on top of the intake manifold, just to kind of figure out what I wanted to do, and lo and behold, it stuck. It stayed there, and now the wife hates it. It'll never pass emissions. Well, I'm gonna get it registered in another state probably. So, but I have cheap up and forward headers. They actually work really well. They just take up your entire engine bay. So if you're the type of person who loves AC like myself, this is oxymoronic to the max, because you just can't fit anything else in here. My transmission dipstick tube, by the way, is right there. It just barely peeks out because my engine bay is already cluttered enough with all of this exhaust. And there's my turbo, by the way. So it's just fitting a complicated project like this into this car. There really isn't a lot of room to work, especially if you're using those up and forward headers. I use the up and forward headers because they're 1 7/8 primaries, and that's a decent size for primaries. But you see right here, I just haven't put my exhaust wrap on yet. I'm getting to it. I just didn't get the other box. But these two headers, they come in, they merge together. It was the big pain in the butt getting them to merge right here, especially for the turbo. I had to cut all sorts of stuff out of this fender well right here. And I'm not sure quite exactly how I'm going to do the air filter inside of there, but I know I definitely want to run an air filter because dirt destroys engines quickly. So coming out the bottom, there's my charge pipe. Coming out to the front, charge pipe comes all the way across. The radiator slanted, yes, I'll address that soon. There will be an air-to-air intercooler right here in this area. But there will be an air-to-air intercooler right here in this area. I don't quite have the funds yet to buy it. It will happen though. I want to run my car with an air-to-air intercooler and a water-to-air intercooler. That way, if I'm out on the streets and I'm having fun, I'm just driving around, I don't have to worry about my charge temperatures getting too high, because this car, this turbo, it puts out a lot of heat. I've seen, without an intercooler, I've seen my temperatures go up past 200 degrees, and that is just absolutely the worst thing that you want to happen in your engine. 200 degrees, I ended up having detonation. I completely destroyed several pistons And this, I've rebuilt the motor since then. Actually, this is a totally different block. Come to think about it. The original block, it had some slight scoring in the cylinder walls. It totally rebuildable. Wasn't that big of a deal. I could have just could have had it probably bored out 20 thousandths, I think is what I measured it at. And I just ordered 20 thousandths pistons over, and I would have definitely been fine. These have really thick cylinder walls. You can bore them out. I think about 80 thousandths is what you can bore them out safely. Anything over 80 thousandths, you end up getting a really thin cylinder wall, and then you have to sleeve it with like a chromoly sleeve or something really strong. But yes, I'll definitely have this intercooler right here. It looks funny because it's not there yet, but it will be. And then the intercooler plumbing comes up the other side, and then it routes itself up. Well, I say it routes itself, but I'm the one that routed it, so I don't even know why I said that. But it's routed up here, and then it comes in right here. So I'm sure there's a turbo guy out there going, oh, you don't have a blow-off valve on your intake. Well, no, you're right, I don't yet. I have one, I just haven't put it on yet. I don't know why. My turbo does have a wastegate, but you don't want to run just a wastegate, especially if you're making, boost, like anything over 6 pounds. You can't just run a wastegate, because what happens is the air becomes so pressurized in this charge tube that if you have just a wastegate, there'll still be pressure in this charge tube, and what it will do is it will push the air back up in through the intake side of the turbo, and it'll make your turbo run backwards, which is really bad. It can cause catastrophic failure in your turbo. And if your turbo comes apart and it flies through your engine, I think you have a pretty good idea of what's going to happen.
Kaboom.
Kaboom. Yeah, exactly. So there's my project in a nutshell. I do have Holley EFI. I don't know if you can see it on that sticker, but I have Holley HP EFI, and it's an amazing system. It can self-tune, or you can tune it while you're driving, or you can tune it just sitting there in your driveway. I've done both. I prefer to tune while I drive because while you're giving it throttle, you can actually hear in each RPM range, like 100 RPMs at a time. You can hear each different RPM range. You can physically hear if you're overfueling or if you're running lean. Plus, the Holley HP EFI will tell you, hey, stupid, I'm rich. They come with wideband O2 sensor, so it's pretty hard to mess up. However, I ran it so rich, when I first put this project together, I burn up a $200 O2 sensor. And that's not a fun mistake to make. If you have a wideband O2 sensor and you run it really rich for too long of a period of time, you will burn out your O2 sensors. There's absolutely no doubt about it. There's no real good way around it. You can get the cheaper O2 sensors with the gauges, and they work, but they really don't. They only work if you're within a certain range. So that range is 12 to 1 to somewhere to like 15 or 16 to 1. And outside of those ranges, it doesn't tell you anything. And when you let off the throttle, a lot of cars go lean. They go like 17 or 18 to 1. I've even seen cars go 21 to 1 when they lean out when you let off the throttle. And that's fine because you're not putting boost into the engine and you're not revving up the engine. You're just at throttle or you're at idle, excuse me. And that's fine, going 17 to 1 at an idle. When you just let off the throttle, a lot of cars do that. You can tune that out, but it's really not necessary if you're not putting heat into the motor. So the Holley HP So the Holley HP EFI system, it works great. The only problem that I have with it, which really isn't a problem, it's kind of my fault for ordering it. It doesn't control the transmission. There's nothing that it can do to control the transmission. So I already had the computer. I didn't feel like spending another $2,000 or $3,000 on another computer and harness. So what I ended up doing was spending $1,500, which I...
OMG.
Yeah, the wife says OMG. OMG, I can't believe you spent $1 on that car. Like, all it does is eat money. So, I ended up spending...
Money shredder.
Yeah, it's a money shredder. I ended up spending $1,500 on what was a TCS, I think it's a PCM 2600 or somewhere in there, specifically for the 6L80E transmission. And what it comes with is the wiring harness, it comes with the computer, and it comes with throttle brackets, or the shifter brackets, excuse me. So, and the shifter. You get all of those things, and it is tunable right out of the box. You can plug it into your laptop. I haven't done it yet, so maybe I'll make a video and you guys can all follow along with me, and we'll learn together. We'll all hold hands and sing Kumbaya. Or maybe not. But the TCM transmission control module, it requires a couple of input signals from the Holley EFI system. One of them is the RPM or tachometer input signal or output signal from the computer. It needs an input signal for the TCM. And the other one is the throttle position control sensor. So it needs signals from those two things. And if you don't have those two things in your Holley EFI system, it's actually not a big deal. There are a couple of ways that you can get around that. And one of those ways is to get a standalone throttle position sensor. And those are just kind of like their own little module. They're like yay big, and I don't know if I'm doing this right. I'm not quite sure what to do with my hands, but they're about yay big, and they bolt right onto your throttle body, right onto whatever that's called. I forget, but they bolt on right there. And you can teach your computer to read that. If you have any questions, I mean, you can ask me. I'll look it up for you, and I'll find it. Or maybe I'll even make a post about it. But yeah, other than that, it's a lot of wiring that TCM, the PCS control module for the 6L80E, it is a lot of wiring, and it can be daunting. There's a lot to do with it. And it's especially hard to make a speedometer and a tachometer in a 92 Firebird work with an LSX motor. It's just, there are ways you can make it work, but there are control modules. Dakota Digital makes a control module that will convert the signal, and Corona.
Not.
But they make a box that will convert not only your tachometer signal, but it'll convert your speedometer signal. So this car, I was lucky enough, it came with, from the factory, an electronic speedometer and an electronic tachometer. A lot of third-gen vehicles, they don't have that. They're manual. You have cable-driven speedometer or cable-driven tachometer, which really actually sucks. I don't personally know how. Well, actually, I do know how to convert it, but that's a whole nother story, and I'm getting off topic. I digress. But anyways, if any of you guys have any other questions on the 6L80 build, this is a turbo 5.3 from a 2002 Silverado, Holley HP EFI, PCM transmission controller. I've got Corvette rods out of an LT, I think it's an LT4 Corvette ZR1, 2012. They're forged rods. I had to machine them down to fit into this engine. They are actually huge factory rods. I had to do a lot of machining on them. But the crankshaft is stock, and the crankshaft holds all of the horsepower. It's great. The pistons, I had to fly cut the pistons because there's just not a lot of room for pistons in a 5.3. So I had to definitely machine out 120 thousandths for the valve reliefs, and that's a significant amount, especially when they're a hypereutectic piston. But I haven't had any issues with the pistons yet, so I'm lucky. Okay, so moving on from the pistons, I have King bearings. They're the black Teflon coated bearings. They're amazing. I checked all my tolerances, all my clearances, and everything. Those bearings have been absolutely amazing. The first 500 miles I put on this car, there was absolutely zero fool's gold in the oil pan. And if any of you know what fool's gold is, a lot of new motors, when they're first put together, the bearings, they self-clearance against the crankshaft and against the rods when you first start a car for at least 500 miles. That's why they say be very gentle on your car for the first 500 miles, break it in. A lot of people do a 1,000-mile break-in. So what the bearings are doing as the crankshaft is rotating in there is the bearings are self-clearancing. So essentially, your rods, your crank, they're shaving off metal off of the bearings for the proper clearance on all of your bearings. It's kind of crazy how it does it, but those little shavings, tiny little shavings, they show up, they look like fool's gold in your oil pan, and that's perfectly normal. If you pick up a shaving, however, from your oil pan and you touch it, you put it in your hand, and you can feel it cutting your fingers, and they're large and flaky, that's a no-go. But with this motor, I have had none of that. I had absolutely no bearing shavings whatsoever. That Teflon coating was amazing, and I've done a couple of oil changes since then, and no problems. And I have put 17 pounds of boost to this motor and still never had a single shaving in the motor. So I would suggest to any of you turbo guys, King bearings, Teflon coated racing bearings. Oh my God, they are amazing. I can't say that you won't have any issues, because if you assemble something wrong, you're going to have some issues. But I have not had any issues, and I've never been happier with any other bearings in my life other than King. I've had Clevites, and Clevites are great. They make a very similar product. I just haven't happened to try their racing products. But I would encourage you to. Clevite's a really good company. King is a really good company. They're all reputable. They've been around. Customer support is up the wazoo. And they care about racers. They care about car guys. They care about enthusiasts. So I am not paid or endorsed by any of these companies. I wish I was. But I'm not. But I would advise anybody, even on a stock rebuild, I would advise you to go with the better bearings. They will save you so much hassle in the future. But moving on, King racing bearings. I have plasma cut molly rings, or plasma molly piston rings in here, and they were all clearanced. They were clearanced for boost. And I think, if I remember right on the chart, it said I needed between 18 and 22 thousandths of clearance if I were going to be running any kind of boost. So it's been a couple of years since I've assembled this motor. So, but I'm pretty sure all of them were right at 21 thousandths. So I was definitely within that tolerance of being able to run boost. And I haven't had any issues with it whatsoever. However, the one issue I did have is I used stock head studs, not studs, but stock head bolts. And what happened was, at 17 pounds of boost, these stock head bolts, are not designed for anything over 6 or 10 pounds of boost or something. I'm pretty sure 6 is the limit. So what happened is, after I torqued them all down, I made a few runs. I ran insanely fast. I was doing 0 to 130 in 10 seconds. Is what I timed it at. But I did probably 10 passes on the car, and all of the center head bolts stretched, and I blew out both head gaskets. I had stock head gaskets on here because people were ranting and raving about the stock head gaskets. But I definitely found out about the stock head gaskets, and they're not that great. Although it could have been just a combination of the head bolts with the head gaskets. But you know, stock head gaskets really aren't designed to handle that kind of boost. They're not designed to handle anything over 6 pounds. But you know, I like to try things and break it anyways. So moving on to the next thing. Sorry, I got loose wires in here, and it looks a little bit sloppy. And these engines, the wiring on them they're just designed to be sloppy, and it's horrible. It drives me nuts. But inside these heads, I've already machined the heads. They have Brian Tully Racing valve springs. I had to machine down the valve guides, I think 100 thousandths, to fit in a stage 2 turbo cam. I will be going with a stage 3 turbo cam here in the near future, but these heads, I don't really want to put a high lift cam on these heads, because these heads really just aren't, from the factory, just aren't designed for such extreme camshaft duration and lift. So the heads, I haven't done a whole lot to the heads. I did a 3-angle valve job on all my valves, and I reground the seats. And I did a 3-angle valve job on my valve seats, and then I ground my valves, and I did a back grind on the valves also. But that's just really to get them to seal. I mean, they're stock valves. There's nothing special about the valves, and this thing still makes crazy awesome horsepower. But in the future, I'm sure I'll be going with I don't know, maybe Airflow Research heads, or maybe even Texas Speed heads. I do like the 5.3 design, because I mean, the 5.3s, they're just a very durable engine, and you have less chances of cracking a cylinder sleeve, or you know, your cylinder bores, because you are introducing a lot of extra heat when you go boosted, and it gets kind of crazy. But I like the 5.3 because I don't have to worry about that, and that's why I like it. Even though I make a little bit less horsepower, I'm okay with the difference in reliability. So yeah, I think that pretty much sums it up. This has been a labor of love. It's been a money shredder. It's been fun, and it's been expensive. You definitely cannot dive into a project like this and expect to spend $5,000. That's just absolutely unrealistic. You can get a junkyard LS, put it in yourself, and have like a really nice stock vehicle for definitely under $5,000. You just can't do all of the extras for $5,000. I mean, you might be able to squeeze in a standalone EFI system and transmission controller, but that would probably be the limit of it. Everything else, I mean, it's up to interpretation. But anyways, really appreciate you guys watching my videos. I know they're a little bit lengthy. There's a lot of information to cover. There's a lot of stupid stuff and knowledge up in here. So if any of you have any questions, feel free to pick my brain. Have a good one.